All right, so the next topic on the agenda is the two activities that the red team is going to be doing for the competition this year and how scoring works. And another thing I wanted to share about these sessions is that there are certain parts of this session that is going to be recorded and shared publicly because this information the blue team can know about, and it's very useful for the blue team, right? So we're very happy for them to know these, so that way they know what to expect, right? And they know how we're going to do the red teaming, so they can have the proper expectations versus having wrong assumptions and trying to play the game in a way that will be disadvantageous to them, right? And that really sort of enable them to optimize for our competition this year. So as I mentioned, at the last week meeting and also at the Monday meeting, right? These were the rules that were sent out to the blue teaming students, right? And so just to reiterate really quickly, right? For the red team, we're doing two activities. We're doing the assume breach with the playbooks with a total score possible of 2,000 points. And then we're also doing this external pen testing activity, right? Worth 500 points. And so, you might ask, how are we going to do both? When do we do each one? Well, what we're doing is we're doing them at the same time, right? So this is kind of like a schedule of the day, right? We start at 9 a.m. I think it's mountain time, but you convert it to your time. But basically an 8-hour day, right? Start of the day until the end of the day here at 5 p.m., right? So we're doing both at the same time. And so let's go for, I think the playbook is the easiest. So let's go through the playbook, right? So the playbook is 2,000 points. It is assume breach, and we're going to be following our playbooks thoroughly for this. And predominantly, this is going to be on the Windows 2016 server that blue team is not allowed to change. If blue team changes it, they're probably going to mess something up there. They're going to be messing up one of our configurations, and they will lose opportunities to score points here, right? So highly recommend blue team not to change anything. But so majority of them is going to be based on the 2016, but we're also going to inject during the game itself. We're going to inject certain changes in the configurations to the few of the other VMs. And so some of our plays are going to be based on these injections on those other VMs as well. And so for this, so that's the information the blue team needs to know. What we need to know as a red team is we're providing you the playbook, and later on the non-recorded session, I'm going to be sharing what the state of our playbook is, right? But basically, you're going to know everything there. You're going to practice it, and we are providing you the information so you can create your own Windows 2016 VM that's pretty much an exact replica of what you're going to see during the competition, right? So for the next 2 weeks, basically, you should be all set here. Just do the practice, right? And do the exercise and make sure you have a working Windows 2016 and run through all the plays. You're going to be all set here. You're going to be golden. Okay. So now the part that's a little more complicated and is different this year from last year is this pen testing. And but funny enough, right? In the earlier versions of the CyberForce competition, for the first 3 years of the CyberForce competition, this is basically what we did, right? Where the white team did not give anything to the red team at all. I think on Friday you were allowed to do some scanning, but it's just nmap scanning, just that's it, just some light scanning. And then on the Saturday, the competition day, then you actually get to like do your attacks and do further pen testing actions, right? So basically, we're kind of like going retro here with this black box pen testing. So we're going to be doing that for the first 3 hours. So for the first 3 hours of the competition, we're not going to give you, so, for the red teamers, we are giving you all the information for the 2016. For all the other VMs in the environment, you get zero information, right? So during these first 3 hours, you can do your scanning and your enumeration, that type of activity. But the reality is, my guess is, from 50 or 75% of the blue teams, you're not going to be able to do much because they had 2 weeks to harden it, right? So based on their hardening and their changes to the system, for the majority of the red teamers, you're not going to be able to do much, and that's okay. That's sort of kind of expected in a way, right? So just keep that in mind and don't feel bad if you don't find anything. That's kind of the nature of black box pen testing. That's just the way it is. And that's why later on, so after the first 3 hours, this part right here, and funny and interesting enough, right? This black box, when you're doing the first 3 hours, there's 0 points there, right? So it's just, you're just kind of enumerating, doing some pen testing type stuff, but really there's no points here. The points, it starts here after the 3rd hour. And this is when we're going to actually give you information about the vulnerabilities that we added to the VMs. And then so now you'll have all the information about all the vulnerabilities in these other VMs that the organizers added to the VM, right? And there are two possible scenarios here with that, right? So the good blue team students, they probably remove them as well. So even though we gave you like, hey, we put a vulnerability here, there's a SQL injection here, right? There's another vulnerability here. Even though we gave you that information, it's probably not usable. That's sort of that could be the case. So just keep that in mind. But this is how. But now though, you can sort of, because we're using a score chat. So that was one of our new implementation last year, is we using a score chat. So for that case where, okay, we give you the vulnerability information, say it's a SQL injection, right? Then you try it out. And it's like, oh, the SQL injection doesn't work. The organizers gave me this vulnerability information and it doesn't work. So what you can do in the score chat, what you're supposed to do is you're gonna then ask the blue team. You're gonna ask the blue team, hey, I noticed the SQL injection that was supposed to be here does not work. How did you fix it, or how did you mitigate it? And if they give you a good answer and they give you proof that they did what they told you, right? And you says, hey, they understood what the vulnerability was and they mitigate it properly, then you would give them points at the end of every hour. So that's another thing that's different here. The scoring here is, right, there's 5 hours after the third, after this gray part, right? There are 5 hours here. So at the end of every hour block, so each hour block is worth 100 points. So at the end of each hour block, you would then assign the points. Like, okay, according to my interactions with the blue team, and I'm scoring them based on their ability of doing detection, of doing preventive actions, of doing mitigations, of doing recovery, right? Of doing IR. So we're covering a multitude of blue teaming skills, and not just preventive actions, right? Not just hardening before the competition. That's not the only criteria. We have like a broad criteria that you can use to score your interactions with the blue team. So back to my example, right? So if they gave you a good example, like, oh, well, we found the SQL injection in this one application and we fixed that so it was no longer vulnerable to SQL injection. And then they gave you a proof, right? They submit like, hey, this was on the line of code. This was the code modifications we did to fix the SQL injection. Then you're like, oh, that looks good. We'll give you full points. But if the blue team is using some kind of gimmick or some kind of cheesy tactic, for instance, say they turn off their SQL service, right? So it's like, oh, the SQL injection doesn't work. But then you're asking them and they're giving you information. It's like, wow, looks like you turn off your SQL server, or you did some really weird adding an authentication layer that doesn't really make sense in the real world, right? So you can make that evaluation. It's like, okay, that kind of prevented the attack, but the vulnerability is still there, or that wouldn't fly in the real world because it would actually break applications, right? So if you decided that's the case, you would let the blue team know, it's like, hey, that's not sufficient. So unless you sort of take down your gimmick defense and actually fix it in a real proper way as you would in the real world, we're not going to give you the full points, right? So that's one scenario, right? In this gray area, they fix it before the competition, then you would go through the chat. The other possibility is that they did not fix it, right? So what happens is, there's some RCE vulnerability, right? You exploit the RCE, you get some kind of shell access there, right? And you're on their box. So what you do in that case, so we're in this gray section now, right? You could do something like, hey, blue team, do you see anything? Do you think I'm on? You could say something like that. And then the blue team was like, no, we don't think so. And then you're like, well, actually, I'm on your box. So then they might scramble. They're like, oh crap, the red team's on our box. Let's try to find it. And then they find you. It's like, yeah, we found you. This is the port number you're using. Blah blah. It's like, okay, now find out how I got in and what did I exploit, right? And they do some forensics or whatever, and some other defenses. So like, oh, it looks like you got in through this RCE on the service, and it looks like it was an unpatched vulnerability for the service, hey, we're going to patch it. And then you as a red teamer is like, yeah, go ahead and patch it. And you're like, okay, I patched it. And then you could try that vulnerability and say, oh, it doesn't work. And in that case, you would also give them full points, right? So we're giving multiple opportunities for blue team to score full points. So one blue team might have fixed it before the competition, right? They could get full points if they showed knowledge of what they're doing and their fix was proper. But even in the competition, if they get exploited, we can still potentially give them full points if they do a really good job of detection, recovery, right, and mitigation, right? So basically, you can get full points in that area as well. And this goes to sort of reinforce the philosophy of red teaming that we're doing here at CyberForce. Here at CyberForce, the red team doesn't dock you points. The red team can only give you points, right? That's sort of the philosophy we're using, because that kind of really helps us to maximize the red team, blue teaming engagement, right? So there's more red teaming type of activities, so the blue team can experience it and learn from it. That's our philosophy. Versus if you go with the other rule set, because red team doesn't want to be kicked off the machines, they will use a tactic to sort of hide more. So they would do less activity because they're not trying to get caught, right? But for us, we're not as concerned with the getting caught part. So that's why, and we have the score chat to be able to resolve this and get the real information about what's really going on the defensive side, right? So I hope that kind of makes sense, right? So, and to summarize before I open this up for questions or comments, is that so in a way, right, this part can be bad in terms of, oh, it looks like I can't really, I'm doing my scans, I'm doing my enumerations, but I can't really be, I'm not really getting anything, right? But check it out, right? At the same time, you're doing your playbook. So if you're not getting much out of this, you can just run some background scans here, whatever, right? Just kind of like, it's kind of like, fishing in the real world, not PH fish, but FISH fish, right? You're just, they're doing some background scans right here, but focus more of your time here in the playbooks, right? In the first 3 hours, perhaps, if you're not really seeing anything here. But then, after the 3rd hours, you're going to be able to switch back and forth here, right? To do both of these activities. So I hope that kind of makes sense, because I've sensed there was some confusion, during the last week when I was trying to explain this, and also, going over the rules here, right? And with that, I will, open it up to some questions or comments, and if there are none, I can sort of, go on with the agenda. All right, I'm not seeing anything, so let's go on. So, okay, so other things I want to share about scoring, and I'm not going to sort of give all of the specific or details for each of these stages, but this part is going to be shared with the blue team. So I wanted to share information that will be very useful for blue team, and it's very important for them to know, right? So because this is an assumed breach exercise, what myself and people like Joe are very cognizant of is that, unfortunately, these kind of competition becomes like a whack-a-mole kind of event, where blue teams could rely on very low tech efforts, like, hey, I'm just going to look at a screen and kill any new processes, right? They can actually be very effective just using that very low tech strategy, because it works, unfortunately, for the game constraints. And so we're kind of trying to avoid that by setting these expectations to remove that. For number one, we're not scoring you on your ability of killing processes and killing connections. That's number one. So I think what we're going to do is on Friday, that's a check-in day, right? We're going to check in on our Discord score chat, help blue team, hey, these are the rules. Let me check your VMs for certain things to make sure they're all in the right configuration, right? So that you will have an opportunity to score full points during the Saturday. And also, they had not been given the credentials to their 2016 VM. That's when we're going to give them creds. So we're going to check in with our scorekeeper, right, for the score chat, and then we're going to give them creds. But I think another thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a connection. We're going to, do a kind of spawning a shell on our Windows 2016 box, and we're like, okay, hey, we spawn a shell, and then we'll ask blue team, hey, blue team, kill that connection, kill that shell, and they'll do it, and they're like, good job. We verified that you can kill a connection. So we're no longer going to be testing that ability throughout the competition. So I think that's what we're going to do to avoid that kind of bottleneck that is sort of a huge dependency in all these competition is like, hey, blue team, don't worry about the shells and connections because we're not going to score you on it. And then on the other side, right, there's trust here in the red team in terms of you're not going to go ham because, hey, the blue team is quote unquote not allowed to kill your shell, right? You're going to do the proper, so, check this out, right? One of the points here that we have here on the, let me see, on the, right here, the pen tester will go at a speed appropriate for the blue team and will not overwhelm, right? So you're going to have to gauge, like, I had this really good conversation at the Monday meeting where someone was asking for, the pen testing portion. He was asking what's the level of sophistication should we use for the types of persistence, right? Because there are some very easy persistences that are very visible, very easy for the blue teamers to find. There's some medium levels of persistence where the blue teamer needs to do a little bit more work to find those persistent mechanisms. And then there are the ones that are super stealthy, right? Where they just blend in so well, and you have to be a really good blue team defender to find those, right? And so the guidance I gave to that question was that you're going to have to gauge where the blue team's at. So the proper way of doing it is like, okay, try the easier to detect one. And if you're seeing that they can't even handle that, then it's probably a waste of time to go through the more advanced persistence, right? And they might need even more help to just learn basic operating system administration concepts, because that's the level there are. So that will be more the nature. So you're probably going to shift more into a purple teaming role versus real red teaming, right? Where you're kind of like really throwing your good stuff because the blue team can't handle it because they have the right skill sets, right? So that's something to consider. Yeah, I think those were the big points I wanted to share about our two processes and a little bit of information about a little bit about how the interactions is, right? And potentially what kind of guidance we're giving for the scoring for the pen test type stuff. So I hope that makes sense. So, I'll give a couple of moments for questions or comments. All right.